Coming up on the next edition of Page 2, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev meets with Pope John Paul. We'll have the story as well as reaction here in Chicago. And we'll take a look at how a team of explorers tore down an ice curtain between the superpowers. All this plus the sights and sounds of the do-it-yourself Messiah. Coming up next on tonight's edition of Page 2.
Good evening and welcome to the December 4th edition of Page 2. I'm Marcella Raymond.
And I'm Debbie Revitzer. Here's what's happening. Pro-life activists, angered by what they call a sellout by gubernatorial candidate Neil Hartigan, rallied at the State of Illinois building Saturday to protest a decision to withdraw the Ragsdale-Turnock abortion clinic case from the U.S. Supreme Court on Friday. Tim Frakes has the story.
Charging that Illinois Attorney General Neil Hartigan is a sellout of the 80s, a small group of pro-life activists rallied at the State of Illinois building Saturday, braving freezing temperatures.
Oh, hey! Ho, ho! Neil Hartigan has got to go!
Reacting to Friday's U.S. Supreme Court decision to suspend oral arguments in the Illinois Ragsdale-Turnock abortion case, angered protesters challenged the Illinois General Assembly to impeach Hartigan.
We need, out of 59 state senators, we need 40 to say 4-0, 4-0, Hartigan has got to go.
Revolving around a Rockford abortion clinic, Ragsdale versus Turnock could lead to further restrictions on the ability of clinic owners to perform abortions in the state, something pro-choice advocates oppose.
He's thwarted the will of the people and made a deal with, the communistic ACLU.
Illustrating the impeach Hartigan theme, one activist performed a juggling act for assembled press.
Thing never
Will be
succeeds.
continued during the next legislative session or during an emergency session if Governor Thompson gets a message that we have to impeach Hartigan now.
Apparently admitting that they have slim hopes of succeeding in their quest, one pro-life activist told me that unless we try, we won't succeed. Reporting from a frigid State of Illinois building, for Page 2, I'm Tim Frakes.
Pro-Life Action League Director Joseph Scheidler has filed a lawsuit against the National Organization of Women, now President Molly Yard and now Vice President Patricia Ireland, alleging damages in excess of $5 million. The complaint alleges that Yard defamed Scheidler at a press conference in 1988, calling the pro-life activist an arsonist and an abortion clinic bomber.
In a historic meeting on Friday, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev met with Pope John Paul II in Rome. In a 45-minute conversation, the two leaders discussed a variety of topics that could have major implication for both Catholic Christians and other denominations. This story now from CNN.
A moment in history that defies words. Two Slavs across the papal desk. Mikhail Gorbachev seemed deferential. Finally, we can sit down and talk, Gorbachev told the Pope. Aides and intrusive cameras were ushered out. The men would speak alone and in Russian. The stately ZIL limousine carried Gorbachev and his wife Raisa into the Vatican 20 minutes behind schedule. The President and the First Lady stepped on Vatican soil in the San Damaso courtyard to be met by Monsignor Gino Monduzzi, a Swiss Guard of Honor 24 men strong and 17 gentlemen of the Holy See. Just as Gorbachev was to reach the Vatican, word came from Moscow that Ukrainian officials had taken a first step toward relegalizing the Ukrainian Catholic Church. Stalin banned the church in 1946. The Vatican demands the church be recognized in return for establishing relations with the officially atheist Kremlin.
One by one, Gorbachev is undoing the mistakes of his predecessors, this meeting with the Pope being perhaps the most symbolic move to restore Soviet respectability, to give Moscow a legitimate place in the world order, to remove the country from its 70 years of isolation.
Before seeing the Pope, Gorbachev closed out the official portion of his visit to Rome with President Kosiga, a pageantry-laden goodbye at the Quirinale. The visit was a Soviet-Italian love fest, and not only among the officials. The Soviet leader was mobbed on a tour of the Colosseum. And in one of the best speeches of his career Thursday night, Gorbachev stole the march on President Bush, whom he meets Saturday in nearby Malta, by calling for the United States and Canada to join 35 European nations for a follow-up Helsinki conference next year, 24 months ahead of schedule. Eastern Europe evolving away from totalitarianism at breakneck speed would be the subject of the conference, the integration of the free west of the continent with the newly liberated east. But the true drama of the Italian trip was at the Vatican. As Gorbachev and Pope John Paul emerged from their 75-minute meeting, the Soviet leaders said they had agreed to establish diplomatic relations. And noting the multi-faith nature of the Soviet Union, Gorbachev said all people have a right to satisfy their spiritual needs, and that a new law on freedom of conscience would be ready soon. The Pope spoke first and began in Russian, and as he switched to Italian, he told the Soviet leader their meeting could not fail to have a powerful impact on world opinion, that it would be a sign that is rich in history. Steve Hurst, CNN, Rome.
Because Soviet Marxist political doctrine has been statedly atheistic, freedom of religion, although tolerated, has been largely suppressed over the years. As a reaction to the Pope-Gorbachev meeting filtered down, we talked with Dr. Pat Callahan, chairman of the Political Science Department at DePaul University.
Deal with them. It's going to improve conditions in the Eastern European world. Clearly, it's going to contribute to the loosening up of political control by the communist states in Eastern Europe for all Christian denominations, because one can't extend freedom of religion to one denomination without simultaneously extending it in greater amounts to other denominations. And I think not just to the Christians, but also to the Jews and to the Muslims in the Soviet Union. A loosening up of the environment. And that's good, and to the extent that all Christian peoples are members of one body, then it's got to be good for the body of the Christian community. Whether if there will be any observable impact as opposed to a more amorphous, more general improvement in the conditions, I couldn't tell.
The World Home Bible League has reached a milestone of sorts. In a press release dated December 1st, the organization announced placing the 1 millionth Chinese home Bible into the hands of persecuted house churches of China. Ministering to Chinese believers since 1979, the Bible League has also provided 1.3 million copies of New Testaments and other material. According to the release, political turmoil following the June 4th crackdown of pro-democracy rallies, students have made Bible deliveries more difficult.
Last week's Page 2 quiz question was, how many spies did Moses send to Canaan? Kay Robinson was the first caller with the correct answer, which was 12 spies, one from each tribe found in the book of Numbers.
We'll take a short break and be right back with more news.
Each week at this time on Page 2, we give you an opportunity to take part in the program by responding to our quiz question. The first person to call our Page 2 quiz line with a correct answer will receive a one-year subscription to Christianity Today magazine. For thoughtful news, insightful editorials, and a perspective on the world and church you can't find anywhere else, turn to Christianity Today magazine. You'll also receive a $20 gift certificate from Harvest Christian Bookstore, located at 10328 Southwestern Avenue in Chicago. For the best Christian books, Bibles, and gospel music, look to Harvest Christian Bookstore. Here now is this week's quiz question.
A fire that apparently began in the bell tower of the Haitian American Community Church in South Chicago Sunday morning swept through the building and spread to a neighboring apartment structure. According to sources, the damage to the church was estimated at $200,000. The blaze, which left the uninsured congregation without a church home, lasted 4 hours.
Started in the bell, and then it was like white smoke. Not too much of a worry because it didn't look too bad. And all of a sudden, so we went and called 911 for the fire department. And on the meantime, it started to spread. It turned into a black smoke. And from there, it started to spread. It spread from the front and all the way to the back of the roof. And in less than 20 minutes, the roof just caved in, and it became a disaster. And both sides of the building just spread out, and that caused the fire, the whole building to consume itself.
You couldn't see nothing. There was a lot of smoke all over. So, you know, it was like you couldn't really see nothing. But you could see the flames, but this whole block was full of smoke, and it was hard to see anything.
You know, we worked so hard to put this together. And not only that, you know, it's a link for the Haitian people in the community. Not only spiritual link, but also in terms of social service ministries. It's a link. Considering, you know, that the Haitian community in Chicago is so small, and the only place where people can come together is the church. You know, with this, you see not only a spiritual matter going, you know, into smoke, but, you know, the change of putting the Haitian community together.
There are an estimated 7 to 8 Haitian American churches in the Chicago area.
Carpentry is a trade that has provided many people with an honest living over the ages, but still you wouldn't find that many people who'd say they felt divinely called to it. Here's a story about one man who did.
This is really a big building. It was originally built for a church and had 600 seats in. It was condemned. And so it was vacant for a while, and then finally this family Mennonite saw the opportunity, bought it for almost a lot price, what it would have cost for the lot. And but then they're going to have to put quite a bit in. We needed some windows, some new window frames. We needed some window sash, more sash than frames. And so I took some 2x4s that were laying around here, short ones that were not going to be used for anything else, good fir wood, and made some out. And also I have some door frames to make. I'm making some door frames, and we need to fit some new doors in. And then I also, in between times, I decided that I had time to make the pulpit and the speaker stand and tables, several tables, and some of the decorations that go on the platform also. So I've been working with some nice oak doing that. Well, the reason we're here is because I've had a long time ambition to be a traveling carpenter for the Mennonite Church. And so we thought we'd have to get started if we were going to spend some time at it. It's been almost like a cultural shock, I'd say. We were really dumb when we came to LA. We didn't know very much. We thought LA was LA, but there's about 100 cities stuck together here or something. I don't know how many. We were sure not prepared for all the security we had to put up with around here. A few of my tools got stolen before I realized you had to lock the door behind you when you went in to work in the church. I'd a whole lot sooner work than sit around, and after all, I'm not old. I'm just 60. I'll be 61 tomorrow. And I enjoy work, and we get a lot of satisfaction out of it. We told the mission board that the orneriest and the hardest and the most needy places is where we wanted to work. And I don't have any desire to go and help build a $500,000 Mennonite meeting house someplace where people got lots of money and where they can do it themselves. I hope I don't get an assignment like that. But if it's somewhere to use some old material or cobble up something or make do or to save money somehow, whatever, just like here, a lot of these projects, we've just saved a lot of money.
Paul has been a tremendous worker. He's been a very valuable asset to our church. The work he does and that he is doing is untiring, unselfish. He has a labor that God will not forget, a labor of love.
We've made lots of friends. We pick up more people to write to all the time. Every place we go, we pick up a few people that we want to keep and say, well, we want to keep in touch with you, and we'll write if you write. So we there's hardly a day goes by we don't get some mail, some letters, and then that's a lot of fun too. So I think that God has given me some abilities, and I'm just happy to use them this way. We're really getting a thrill out of it. We really enjoy it.
The Massachusetts Episcopal Diocese has accepted an interim report that affirms same-sex relationships. The report, which will be sent to all 190 parishes for discussion, calls on the national church to affirm the holiness of sexuality in all its orientations in terms of its potential for life-giving, healthful sexual practice.
This past summer, for the first time ever, students from the InterVarsity Student Fellowship and 2 universities in the Soviet Union co-sponsored an exchange program in which 27 Americans lived and studied in the Ukraine for 4 weeks.
I thought Kiev was really pretty, the main downtown part that we were at. A beautiful city in many ways. There are lots of trees and beautiful parks and lots of old churches and monuments.
I guess you could say the whole trip was more or less planes, trains, and automobiles.
I remember the times that we were together and the times that we visited in their homes. And I remember the crowded streets and the crowded buses and the long lines for bread and for food, and that makes an impression on me here.
Even though their culture is largely different, their language is different, their clothes are different, their hearts are the same.
One thing I really admired about the Soviets was their generosity.
They were really wanting peace.
They're also really serious about friendships. And when you make a friend there, you've made a friend for life.
For a long time, I always wondered what it was going to be like when we left. But I guess I never realized how close the relationships were going to be and how hard it was going to be to leave them and come back.
In the summer of 1989, for the first time ever, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship and 2 universities in the Soviet Union co-sponsored a cultural and academic exchange program. 27 InterVarsity students lived and studied in the Ukraine for 4 weeks. The students were hosted by Kiev State University and the Kiev State Pedagogical Institute for Foreign Languages.
My view of Soviets changed a lot in different areas. One thing, I'm thinking that everything was going to be drab and sad and dark and dismal, and that they weren't allowed to do anything or didn't have any opportunities.
I knew they would be very intelligent, which they were very intelligent, but I thought they would be much more politically minded.
You see, I imagined Americans as very free people, yes, who only love chew gums, yes, love smiling and nothing else.
I went to the Soviet Union thinking that they were all going to be atheists and that they were going to be totally closed to the gospel and just want to argue with us on every point. And I was really surprised with their openness and the fact that they wanted to hear about our faith.
And these Americans, they are not rare, are very unusual because they know the Bible, they read it, and they understand the common truths which are common for everybody.
The American students had the opportunity to live in the Soviet Union during a time of history-making social change. Under Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet people are experiencing a taste of freedom unlike anything they've experienced before. Economic and political reforms brought about by the new policy of perestroika give hope to a people handicapped by a troubled economy. Gorbachev's policy of glasnost is seen by most of the world as a new opportunity to work for peace, greater global understanding, and a tolerance for different ideas.
Yeah, I think glasnost made it possible to meet with Americans, and it made possible to be true while talking about different things. I mean, not only about us, but about different and difficult questions of our history and difficult problems which we have in our country. I was not afraid of these talks.
And then she said, Anissa, you have no idea what it is to be lied to for 18 of your 20 years. And I said, you're right. I have no idea. And it wasn't until 2 years ago that she understood that what she had been reading and been taught in school was not true. There were supposed to be these changes going on, and there have been changes because there's nowhere else to go, but they're not seeing any direct results. They're not seeing more food in the grocery store. They're not seeing more varied items. They're not seeing that. They're seeing empty shelves.
Joining us now is Paula Harrison. Paula is a member of InterVarsity and was a member of the exchange team that traveled to the Soviet Union. Paula, thank you for joining us this evening. We appreciate you being here. Why don't you start off right off the bat telling us what InterVarsity is?
InterVarsity Christian Fellowship is a non-denominational Christian organization that works on 900 different college campuses. It's very similar to Campus Crusade or Navigators, if you've heard of those two organizations. It works with groups of students to try to develop them as Christians and to help them further, not only practice their faith, but live it out on campus.
Now, Paula, you were in the Soviet Union for 4 weeks, right?
Yes.
What was the purpose of the trip? Were you trying to convert Soviet students, or were you just trying to feel things out and see how they were over there?
Well, I don't know that it's really an either-or kind of situation. I mean, of course, we hope that some of these people will come to know Jesus, but it's a much more process-oriented kind of program. At the time we went, it was extremely novel. There were no other organizations that were sending Christian students over, or Christians in general, over for anything more than a kind of tourist program. And so the fact that we took a group over for a whole month was unique. So we were trying to explain to people what the gospel is in the context of relationships and to help students get to know each other. The program was set up so that students could spend lots of time together. They had language lessons in the morning, and then we had some different discussions that students led on issues from related to what do students do for entertainment, to what does faith, what kind of role does religion play in America, churches, different denominational things.
What did the students think when you did talk about the church and religion and the part that it played in America as opposed to the role that it plays in Russia?
Well, they were really intrigued. Actually, that discussion, the discussion topics were published in advance, and so that discussion attracted a whole number of people, not only students but also administration officials, and they were very curious. They had tons of questions. The discussions were open-ended. Most of them lasted about an hour, but this one went on for 2 or 3 hours with numbers of questions, not only about institutionalized religion, but about how these particular Christian Americans lived out their life in a different way than other Americans, and what difference morality made in their life.
Did you find that the church did have a place then? I mean, if these people were so responsive, do you think that it may eventually produce some converts or make the way for the whole state to kind of overturn their atheistic attitude?
I think ultimately, yes, there's a long-term influence that's being felt. You have to remember that these students were raised under atheism, and so the concept of God and the concept of a person in university believing in God is very unique to them. They could never, in their system, they've been taught over and over again that intellectuals don't believe in God, and so a person who goes to college to believe in Christianity is something like believing in voodoo or something that's incredibly mystical. It's difficult for them to conceive. And so the process of discovering that God can have a very real influence on people's lives, and that faith can be exciting and it can influence your day-to-day decisions it was mind-boggling to the Soviet students.
Paula, what are your impressions in relation to the recent events in East Berlin? And, you know, and the effect that they would have even on the Russian students. And
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I was really curious about whether they even heard about the crumbling wall in East Berlin. But I've since received letters from Soviet friends who said that, yes, they were hearing about that and about the situation in Hungary. I think particularly with Gorbachev coming out just 2 days ago and saying that there is religious freedom now in the Soviet Union, there's incredible possibilities. I can't conceive of what God could do next in the Soviet Union. But anytime you have a situation of such extreme opportunity, there's opportunity for new religious freedom, but there's also opportunity that there's the possibility that this opportunity will change and that negative things could come out as well.
Now, Paula, in the video, a couple of the people said they had preconceived notions of what the Soviets had preconceived notions of what Americans were like, and Americans had the same reaction towards Soviets. And it seemed like they found out that they were basically the same. What were the people like? Did you really find that you had a common bond there? And are you still keeping some relationships and some ties going on, even though you've left?
Yes, that's one of the most exciting things about the program is that, well, I'll have the opportunity to go back next summer, but I'm writing letters to these people. They're my friends. We have things in common. We enjoy the same kind of music, which is, it's exciting to see people halfway across the world, people from the evil empire that are like you in so many ways. I think that was one of the things that made the program such a success, and that's why so many students want to go back this next summer, is because of the chance to make friends.
So, Paula, you will be doing a trip like this again?
Oh, yes. This last summer there were 2 groups, and we already have invitations for 10 different groups. We're looking into sending many more.
And all 10 groups will go to Russia? Or all over?
No, we have invitations for that many. We're not sure that we have the staff, so that's definitely a prayer concern, that we could have the numbers of staff we need.
Now, Paula, we do have a number that, or an address rather, that we can put on the screen for those who would like a copy of the videotape. It's to InterVarsity in Madison, Wisconsin. Is that
right?
That's correct. Okay.
They could ask for applications for the program at the same address.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. Good luck.
Thank you, Paula.
Coming up next, we'll have some tips on surviving the cold and flu season. Stay with us.
The story of Harold Morris is a story of real pain and suffering, and yet it turns into a real time of victory and a time of celebration. Now, the film is based on the book with the same name, and it's called Twice Pardoned. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's produced by Focus on the Family. Let's take a look at the opening of the film.
This week in history. On December 4th, 1861, the Presbyterian Church in the Confederate States of America separated themselves from the Northern Presbyterians. On December 5th, 1791, the death of Austrian musician and composer Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. On December 6th, 1769, English poet William Cowper penned the lines to the hymn, "Oh, for a Closer Walk with God." And on December 8th, 1965, the Vatican II Ecumenical Council closed.
What happens when you combine the elements of murder, hard time in prison, and finding Christ there? Jim Kragel has the answer in tonight's movie review.
The story of Harold Morris is a story of real pain and suffering, and yet it turns into a real time of victory and a time of celebration. Now, the film is based on the book with the same name, and it's called Twice Pardoned. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's produced by Focus on the Family. Let's take a look at the opening of the film. Now understand that that's really the only drama in the film. The rest of it is Harold Morris standing in front of a teenage audience and just telling them about his life. But what a life it is, filled with extortion, prison, murder, and salvation, all wrapped in the same package. Let's take a look at how Harold Morris uses humor to communicate this serious message.
You figured out for yourself, what is he asking you to do when he says prove your love? He's asking you to surrender your virtue, throw away your self-respect, risk the loss of your precious reputation, and risk getting in trouble, and that is not love. He doesn't care what's best for you, because anyone that loves you wants what's best for you. Let me tell you how you deal with that character. Carry your Bible with you. Put it on the seat between you. By the time he crawls over Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he's worn out. Now, he might not ask you out again, but he's doing you a favor. But you don't need a character like that. You see, he's a Romeo. He's a Don Juan. And that's not what you need. You see, all the girls want a macho man. All the guys want a macho girl. But that's not what you need. Here's what you need. You need a nacho man and a nacho girl. That's one that'll stand up and say to Satan, I'm not your man, I'm not your girl, with a lot of cheese on it.
Now that works with his audience, not just because it's humor, but because his life is real and kids respect him for that. He deals with tough issues like sex and drugs and alcohol, and he deals with them head on. This is just a talking head, but it's one of the most powerful talking heads that I've ever seen. I would highly recommend that you watch Twice Pardoned with Harold Morris. I'm Jim Kragel, and that's a look at what's happening in Christian film.
For those of you who are interested in renting some of the Christian films and videos you see on page 2, movie critic Jim Kragel wants you to know that your local Christian bookstore is the place to go. If they don't have what you're looking for, in most cases, they can order it for you.
The cold and flu season is upon us once again. It's estimated that more than 60 million Americans will suffer the conditions of the common cold this year, and more than 130 million will get the flu. Tom Kendall has this report.
You guessed it, it's cold and flu season. Time for us to start taking extra precautions to ward off the pesky germs that can take us away from the things we like to do. No one really knows how to cure the common cold, but there are steps you can take to help prevent a cold or flu from occurring and to relieve their symptoms if you're sick.
Colds and flus are more likely to occur during the colder months, when people tend to congregate indoors where germs can spread easily. Also, the colder air outside, coupled with the dry, heated indoor air, makes the lining of the nose drier and more susceptible to viruses.
One way a virus spreads is when someone with a cold or flu sneezes or coughs, and the resulting spray is breathed by someone else. Or, more commonly, when someone touches a contaminated object. Children under 6 are particularly susceptible. Germs are spread easily by hand when sick children cover their mouths when they cough and then touch another child's hands or toys. To avoid spreading germs, cold or flu sufferers should use tissues when they cough or sneeze and should wash their hands frequently with soap and water.
We can avoid getting germs from someone else by keeping our hands clean and away from our eyes and nose, especially if we've come in contact with somebody with a cold or flu.
If you have a cold and all its symptoms, nasal congestion, sneezing, runny nose, itchy, watery eyes, you may want to consider a nasal decongestant with an antihistamine. 12-hour extended action tablets are convenient. You need only take one for daytime and one for nighttime. If your child has a cold, consider a pleasant-tasting liquid nasal decongestant with an antihistamine that can help all the same cold symptoms, taken once every 4 hours. If your child is under 6, your physician can suggest an appropriate medication. Follow these tips, and you'll have a better chance of weathering this cold and flu season. And if problems persist, make sure you see your doctor. This is Tom Kendall reporting.
We'll take a short break, but stay with us as we break the ice curtain in our next segment.
Here's the weather forecast. Tonight, partly cloudy with a low in the upper 20s. Tomorrow, Tuesday, partly cloudy again with a high in the mid-30s.
With
With all the recent excitement surrounding the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, fewer Americans are aware that part of the Iron Curtain was on U.S. soil, or perhaps ice would be a better word. Our next story involves an historic breakthrough in U.S.-Soviet relations in the geographic region that ties the two countries together and until recently kept them apart.
12 Soviet and American adventurers set out from Siberia in midwinter 1989 on an epic journey across 1,000 miles of Arctic tundra. This unprecedented trek was the first expedition since the advent of the Cold War to travel between the United States and the USSR across the Bering Strait. At this strategic channel which separates U.S. and Soviet territory by only a few miles, the border had been closed tightly for over 50 years.
We traveled 1,200 miles across Siberia, then over the Bering Strait and on through western Alaska. It took about 2 months, and our route was designed to take us through all the Eskimo settlements of that part of the world. And we traveled by dog sled. We traveled by traditional means because, mind you, these are very remote places. There's no roads there. They're accessible only really by dog sled. And the natives of the area are much more receptive to visitors who arrive by traditional means, and thus arriving by dog sled afforded us an opportunity to celebrate with these Eskimos the opening of their region. As we'd approach these Siberian villages, the native Siberians would pour out onto the tundra, and they'd see us coming across the mountains by dog team and realizing that they were having visitors, and they'd heard through the bush telegraph, so to speak, that we were visitors coming from another side of the world.
Battling treacherous winds and bitter cold, the men and women of this unique venture overcame the elements and fully accomplished their mission. They dramatically brought their countries together at the international date line. They melted the ice curtain with the signing of an accord allowing free travel across the border for the region's native population. And it's all captured in a new book entitled Bering Bridge, the Soviet-American Expedition from Siberia to Alaska.
The goal of this project was a group of individuals making our contribution towards world peace. And this effort is rather specific. We set out to open the U.S.-Soviet border in the Bering Strait region and to reunite the Eskimo people of Siberia and Alaska who've been cut off for some 40 years by the Cold War.
What was your reaction to the news of free travel between the Eskimo groups?
Well, the signing of the treaty that actually opened the U.S.-Soviet border in the Bering Strait was very gratifying to us because that was a goal that we set out to achieve a little over a year ago, and it seemed almost unattainable. But our project dovetailed nicely with all the other changes going on, and so when it all came full circle, and suddenly we realized that this expedition had international repercussions, we felt very gratified and very honored to have been part of it.
For those of us who can't escape the frigid blast of Chicago winters by heading south, here are a few tips for making winter more comfortable.
You can't do much but bundle up against the winter weather when it blows at you out of doors. But once closed indoors, in your office or in your home, there are ways of controlling the environment to make it warm and comfortable. You have to do more than just raise the thermostat, according to Dr. John McCarthy, one of the country's leading indoor air quality consultants.
Well, generally there are 4 factors that are involved in controlling an environment during wintertime especially. One is odor in a space. The other is velocity of air moving through a space, air movement, drafts, for example. You have temperature, and finally relative humidity.
The interrelation of temperature to humidity is most important. A balance of the two creates a comfort zone in your home.
Most people feel comfortable in the vicinity of 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 40 to 60% of relative humidity. So what we like to be able to do is to, if you're going to be decreasing the temperature, be able to compensate by increasing the relative humidity somewhat. All of us are very familiar with temperature. You raise the thermostat in your house. And relative humidity, a lot of people use humidifiers, for example, to try and get more moisture in the air. And this is especially important during wintertime.
Any device that introduces drops of moisture to the air can be called a humidifier. But what's important is the quality of that moisture.
Some of the new humidifiers have a special coating on the water reservoir that eases in cleaning and therefore would result in a purer mist being emitted into the air.
Proper humidifier placement means maximum comfort in the home. Not too close to windows to avoid condensation and away from obstructions. Dr. McCarthy says pure mist moisture can benefit you in some ways you wouldn't expect.
There is less cracking of skin, less irritation of the nasal passages and respiratory tract. There's also less cracking of wood and leather furniture. And finally, there's, perhaps more importantly, there's been a recent study that's just come out of Germany that has shown that children that live in homes with humidification have fewer colds than children who do not.
This is Jim Pappas reporting.
For over a decade, performances of the do-it-yourself version of Handel's Messiah have been thrilling participants with the joy of music. A few years ago, we did a profile at Chicago's famed Orchestra Hall. Enjoy.
I had a really great time because I really love the music.
I think it'd be fun, and I can't sing, and no one's going to care.
Come to sing the Messiah, the do-it-yourself Messiah. I've enjoyed it so much the first two times that we just want to come back.
These musicians are part of the most popular one-night stand in Chicago, the Do-It-Yourself Messiah. This season, nearly 3,000 people will politely crowd into Orchestra Hall on Michigan Avenue in Chicago to participate in the chorus, the size of which George Frederick Handel could not have envisioned when he wrote his oratorio nearly 250 years ago.
Unless you're a participant, you can't really understand what's going on.
We always give ourselves an encore.
The story begins 11 years ago with a man named Al Booth in a small parish church in Bromley, England. At the appointed time, a conductor arrived with a 16-piece orchestra and 4 soloists.
There was a quick run-through for about 15 minutes, and then everybody participated in the Messiah. And when we came out of church that day, that evening, not only was such a great thrill to be a participant instead of just a listener, that I decided at the moment that if we ever returned to the States, that I would try to put one on. That was in 1974.
Al Booth did return, and in 1975 he organized the first Do-It-Yourself Messiah. This event has been sponsored for most of its years by Tallman Federal Home and Savings, a well-known patron of the arts in Chicago. But according to everyone involved, including Don Kotwas, Director of Special Events at Tallman, the backbone of the Do-It-Yourself Messiah is Margaret Hillis, founder and conductor of the Chicago Symphony Chorus.
She has a rapport with the audience next to no other conductor I've ever seen.
She's number one.
Start before D. 1, 2, 3, 4 bar.
I think it'd be very, very difficult for any other top-notch conductor to be able to handle 2,600 people who have never performed or rehearsed together with an amateur orchestra of 100 young musicians and come out with the results that we do in the performances that we have.
I thought to myself, there's so many stodgy, terrible messiahs that go on. Maybe I'll do Handel a favor if I show what the tempos ought to be, and also something about how the piece is put together.
Finally, the rehearsal is over and the doors are opened. Hundreds of holiday vocalists divide themselves according to part, some purchasing musical scores at the door, others clutching their old, well-thumbed editions. As with any performance, the conductor primes the chorus with last-minute instructions and encouragement.
The piece itself is a masterpiece. It's the granddaddy, actually, of all music, Western music, written since Beethoven put the score under his pillow at night. He admired the fugues.
It was funny, the first night, I'll never forget, the audience, the chorus, was very nervous. And I talked to them a little bit. I told them about the piece, that you have to remember that he's an opera composer and so on. Now I said, don't be afraid. After all, even though we're trying to do the continuity of the piece, if we get into trouble, we'll just stop and start over again. That seemed to relax them a little bit.
We're beginning at letter F, in case you want to follow the music.
She has sort of a way with audiences. She has an outgoing attitude toward the The people who are participating, first of all, first and foremost, she's an A#1 conductor. She's probably the finest choral conductor in the United States.
I have fun. I enjoy doing it. And people are full of joy, and they come together and they share something that is very special.
Besides the first violin, the harpsichordist, and the organist, the entire orchestra is made up of amateurs. Some play in suburban orchestras, string quartets, or just for fun. Virtually anyone who can play is welcome.
Anyone who thinks that they can play well enough so that Margaret Hillis won't hear their mistakes if they make any.
Anybody and everybody. Some of them I don't think pick up their instruments except to play this.
What is it like to conduct an amateur orchestra?
Hard work. It takes a lot of faith.
Is it something you dread?
No, they try very hard, and some of them are really quite good. Last night, they played the first half very, very well. And then the second half, they began to lose their concentration. And the cellos and basses rushed a little bit. They forget to count, even though I scream at them in the rehearsal, count.
I play the first trumpet here, and I've been doing this for about 6 years now.
Why do you do it?
I love it. I love it. This is the greatest music written, really.
I've always enjoyed playing the Messiah, and particularly the do-it-yourself Messiah. It's such an exhilarating experience when you hear those oceans of voices coming at you from the auditorium. It makes it all worthwhile. It's something I look forward to every year.
The message of Handel's Messiah is one of peace and brotherhood, and that is really what is the major stimulant as far as I'm concerned.
Messiah has been the most beloved piece, probably, that was ever written. A group came back last night, and faces beaming and very happy. They say they go out of there feeling like they're 6 feet off the ground.
This year's performance will take place on December 17th and 18th, but if you don't have tickets, you're out of luck for this year's performance, which is already sold out.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
Finally tonight, 36% of Americans shop for Christmas gifts without a shopping list, according to the results from the latest Maritz Amera poll. When asked who's the most difficult person for which to select a Christmas gift, 1/4 of the men said their wives are the hardest to please, while females ranked fathers as the most difficult person to shop for.
Many of you may not have known, but Debbie was recently in South Africa with Among Friends, and it's good to have you back.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your trip?
Well, first off, I want to start off by saying that the reason we were there is we were invited by the National Religious Broadcasters of South Africa, and that's because Jerry Rose is not only president of TV-38, but he's also president of the National Religious Broadcasters in the States, which really makes him the international president. So he had been invited for the past several years and finally decided to go, and also a group of South African Christian businessmen invited some from the station to come and do programs. So that's what we were doing there.
So what did you cover? What did you see?
Well, we traveled from city to city, really. We were trying to give people kind of an overview of what the country's like. It's a beautiful, beautiful country, many beautiful cities. But what we were doing also was talking to politicians while we were there, as well as talking to ministers. We were really mostly interested in the ministry that was taking place in South Africa, because so much is going on. So many ministries are developing, so many missions, and we really wanted to let people know about the good that is happening in South Africa.
So this is new. This is something that's new, basically?
Well, it's been building for years, but so much, we just don't hear about that much.
Right.
You know, the secular news media doesn't tell us about that, and so we wanted to go and report on some of that, as well as letting people know about some of the politics that are going on there and some of the political changes that are taking place.
Well, speaking of that, you were actually involved in an historic moment while you were there with the Separate Amenities Act.
Right. That was really something to be there. Many of the cities that we were in when we were talking first came out when we were in Durban, and it mainly involved the beaches, but they said the beaches had already been open for a couple years, so it's just getting it off the books.
Right. Well, it's good to have you back.
Thanks.
I'm glad we'll be working together again. And as we close tonight, enjoy the festivities recorded last week during the lighting of the Daly Plaza Christmas tree. Good night.
Good night.
2, 3! You know Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen, Comet and Cupid and Donner and Vixen, but most of all, do you recall the most famous reindeer of all? Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw him, you would even say it glows. All of the other reindeers used to laugh and call him names. They never let poor Rudolph join in any reindeer games. Then one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa came to say, Rudolph, with your nose so bright, won't you guide my